Okay, so I'm going to try something a little bit new, right? Hopefully trying new things. I recorded an episode on good value folding knives, as I know many of you probably carry a folding knife. And in the decades of experience God's blessed me to have in using knives and carrying knives and doing many different things, whether that be warfare or hunting, sharing that knowledge with you. I'm going to put this episode, since it could go equally well on Gunfighter Life, I think, or Alpha Male. Here's the plan. Put it out on a Monday on Alpha Male, and then put out an episode that I've done before on Blades every day of the week, that week, on Alpha Male Podcast. And then putting it on a Friday, on Gunfighter Life. A lot of people I know don't listen to these episodes the day they come out, but hopefully many do. And if you hear it on Alpha Male, then hopefully, if you're into knives, you'll listen to the entire week. And then if you listen on Gunfighter Life, you like that episode, maybe you go check out Alpha Male and check out all the episodes on Blades that came out that week. Because I don't know what the Venn diagram overlap is with the data that I have. I don't know, but I know that Gunfighter Life gets a lot more listens than Alpha Male. So hopefully people that just listen to Gunfighter Life will think, hey, I'd like to hear about big fixed blade knives or something like that, and go check out Alpha Male Podcast. Hey, multi-tools, that interests me. I'll go check out Alpha Male Podcast. Hopefully it benefits both, right? Number one in life is God. There's more to life than God and then guns. There's also knives and many other things, right? So if you haven't been listening to Alpha Male, maybe this will spark your interest. And I'm not saying you have to listen to everything, but there's a lot of things on there that if you're into Gunfighter Life that you might like to listen to on Alpha Male. Anyway, with that, that's the plan. If you see this episode and listen to this intro, you should understand, and maybe you'll go check it out. With that, I just want to say thanks for all you do. Have a blessed day.
You like knives? What kind of man doesn't like knives? Knives is what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, good value folding E.D.C. knives. That's what we're going to talk about today. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to put this on Alpha Male Podcast or Gunfighter Life or both. I don't know what that crossover Venn diagram is where those two overlap. And sometimes I get an episode I think that would do equally well on both. So, either way, this podcast is coming at this with God at the center. I'm a Christian first and foremost. That comes out in everything that I do. And this podcast is no different, whichever podcast this comes out on. I'm going to forego the bio. If you're listening to this, you've probably listened to other episodes. So, if you want some bona fides, some establishment of street cred, go listen to some other bios on some other episodes. I just did a pretty deep theological sermon for Simple Man Sermon, so I thought it would be nice to have a little light-hearted chat about good values in folding knives. Let me start out first by saying what I mean by good value. For it to be a good value in knives, at first I think has to be a good knife. A garbage knife, what I would consider like a gas station knife. Something like that. Something I wouldn't want to trust my life to. I don't consider a good value a knife because I don't consider it a good knife. There are a place for those knives. Now, I grew up pretty poor in the South. I am holding a knife right now that I dearly love, that my grandma got for me, who's no longer here on this earth. I may have been 5-ish years old. It's been sharpened so many times. It's an old school kind of locking penknife. Brass. Cheap. The kind of knife I'm talking about. There was a place for this knife for a 5-year-old little blonde-haired boy running around the backwoods of Virginia. Right? She probably didn't know I was going to treasure this knife and have it well over 30 years later. Maybe one day, God willing, get to pass it down to my son. Although we were pretty poor, so maybe that's what she could afford. But there's a place for these kind of knives. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a knife that you would every day carry, that you would trust your life to, that's more than a gas station knife. Putting that knife aside. Good value in knives. And I generally don't like to talk about price, especially with inflation. Maybe you listen to this next year and the prices on these things have doubled or gone up by 50% or 500%. I don't pretend to be an economist. I don't pretend to see the future. That does not lie in my power. That lies in God's power. But at the time of this recording, in the year of our Lord 2023, on the second day of the month of June, I'm talking around the $40 to $50-ish range. I think that's where you get the most value. I certainly have more expensive knives than that, by God's grace, and I don't actually generally have my go-to EDC knife as a folder. It's a fixed blade. I've talked about this many times. I generally carry a fixed blade knife day to day as part of my EDC. I've done other episodes on that. You can go back and look up. However, I know that the vast majority of men, I hope, are carrying knives, and they're probably carrying folders. That being said, I'm here to serve you. What started this? I almost always recommend as your go-to. Do pretty much anything. Folding, good value knife is a buck 110 slim. What I would consider the best go-to folding EDC pocket knife. I carried that thing as a professional hunter and guide, carried one for years. I would not feel bad butchering out an elk on the side of a mountain. I did much butchering with that knife. It is a great knife. It is a great EDC knife. It's pretty lightweight, light enough to go running in wearing a pair of silkies. It's a phenomenal life. Recently, living as a neo-nomad, growing across country, got through that by God's grace pretty unscathed. A broken window and a couple of knives lost along the way. One of those being the beloved Buck 110 Slim. And I immediately wanted to go out and buy another one. But I thought, professional podcaster, I'm here to serve you guys. Perhaps I can find a knife that's better, that can knock that knife out of the first place position that I've been recommending for years. And I've had a couple of other knives that I've had over the years that don't have anymore. And this is not an exhaustive list, but I think a pretty good list of the best value and that kind of price range. Let me start off by talking about a classic, the CRKT M16. And these are classic, so they've been around a long time, and there are a lot of iterations of these. You can get them in a tanto, you can get them with a partial serration, you can get them with different kinds of serrations, you can get them with different finishes. And I should say every knife I'm going to recommend is a locking knife. That is important, a locking knife. CRKT is a locking knife. They've been around a long time. That CRK M16. What I like about it, I like the variety. I like that you could have it in a traditional swept back clip point blade. I like that you can get it in a tanto if you're more urban and have it for like a tactical backup. I like that a lot of them have the, for lack of a better term, hilt on the blade, a lot of times on both sides. That's pretty handy for stopping your hand from slipping up on the blade if you have to shove it into something. I like that. It's a good handy knife. It's metal on metal, metal handle, metal blade, which you may like. I find with today's modern material a little bit heavy, but they're a good knife. They're a good knife. They're a good value. CRKT is a good knife company. That M16, it's not a bad choice. That's about the base that I would go for a good go-to EDC. If they said you have to have this as your EDC knife, I'd say okay, that's fine. The next one I'm going to talk about I carried for quite a while as my EDC. This one is going to be the Cold Steel Tough Light. It's got a very aptly named model. It is tough. It is light. It is a great knife. It is a pretty straight edge sheep's foot. So if you want a good utility knife, It'd work good for defense too, but you're not trying to butcher an elk with this. You're not trying to do bushcraft with it. You want a good go-to utility knife. Most of what you do is utility work, slicing boxes, cutting cardboard, things like that. It's a great blade shape for that. It's kind of a sheep's foot with a decent point on it. You could do some stabbing, puncturing with it if you had to. Not really designed for that, but it would do it. But it has a very good straight edge, which if you're very new into sharpening is pretty easy to sharpen. You don't have to worry about the contour and sharpening the rounded edge of the blade. So if you're looking to get into sharpening, probably the easiest knife on the list to sharpen. And it's light. It's a lightweight knife. It's also stainless. I like that. Generally an uncoated blade. And when I carried one, carried one as my E.D.C. for a while as a professional gunfighter. It wasn't my only knife, but it was kind of my pocket weak side carry knife, the Tough Light. And one thing I don't like about it is that it's unfinished stainless and it's pretty shiny. So what I would do is take some kind of gun coating, Duracoat, Durabake, something like that, and spray the blade and the handle. My bad, not the handle, but the clip that hangs out of your pocket. I would spray that, usually whatever color my pants were. Khaki was pretty common in that world. I'd spray it a pretty similar color, so you couldn't tell that it was in my pocket unless you were really close. It didn't stand out like the silver pocket clip. So if you're trying to be a little bit more covert, you're probably either going to want to paint that clip, or maybe this is not the knife for you. If you don't care about somebody seeing a pocket clip in your pocket, not a big deal, but a very good, tough, light little knife. It also has a pretty substantial cutout in the blade for being able to open it. I find that nice to be able to open it both hands. Pretty simple, easy to open blade, and that also aids in making the blade a little bit lighter. They have a Tough Light Mini, of which I bought one for my wife. She does not everyday carry on her person in her pocket as much as I would like her to, but it is one of her go-to. So if you want a little tiny like backup knife, I wouldn't have the Tough Light, the Mini Tough Light. I wouldn't have that for my go-to E.D.C. The Tough Light, yeah, I would accept that. The Mini's a bit too small for that. But if you already have, you carry a good fixed blade for E.D.C. and you want a good, for lack of a better term, utility beater knife that's easy to sharpen, that doesn't cost a lot, that's a little bit smaller, the Mini Tough Light is even smaller and lighter. It's a great little knife. Now let's talk about a knife that I have had it since the early aughts, the early 2000s. It was my E.D.C. for a long, long time. I probably almost certainly had a fixed blade on me as I was a Marine. I almost certainly had a K-bar or similar fixed blade knife, maybe a bayonet depending on the mission of my combat arms. I was an assaultman, so sometimes I had a rifle, sometimes I had a handgun, sometimes I had a bayonet, sometimes I had a K-bar. But in my pocket, this knife, and it looks like it. Nothing special, a Gerber I bought at Walmart. And I wouldn't be talking about it, except they still make it. And it's a good all-around knife. There's no telling the amount of things I've cut open with this knife. No telling how many times it's been through the wash. I think it's earned a place in my little small knife bag. It's kind of like a men's shaving kit. It's not like I have a giant knife collection. But that one, much like the one that my grandma got me, they've been through a lot, and I could get a brand new one, similar model, has a little bit. I'm not the most sentimental guy, but again, maybe I'll get to pass that knife down. So probably don't want to E.D.C. it day to day anymore, but it's a good recommendation. It is the Gerber Paraframe. They make a Mini. Again, the Mini would be a good backup knife, but the regular size Paraframe I would consider adequate for an E.D.C. knife. It's much like the CRKT, skeletonized metal handle, so it's a little bit heavier than it needs to be. For 20 years ago, that was pretty much a good standard. I think there are better, stronger, lighter materials to make handles out of today that are perfectly strong and adequate, that are lighter. I'm not opposed to carrying a fairly heavy knife, but I don't want to carry extra weight where it's not needed. So, not a bad knife. Certainly carried it a lot, and it looks like it. I have the just straight edge, no serrations. They do make some with partial serrations if you want partial serrations, but pretty classic knife. I probably did get it at Walmart. And again, I've had it since the early aughts, so she's been around a while. And you can still get them, I believe, the Gerber Para. I guess Para frame. Gerber Para frame knife. Now let's talk about one of the knives. I bought two because I was short two. So I figured spend a little bit of money and see if I could get one that could compete or even outdo the Buck 110 Slim. So let's talk about this one. A lot I like about it. It is the Ka-Bar Dozier. Dozier. This one specifically, still in that price range, is the D2 model. I got this one because I wanted to try D2 steel. I have a lot of different steels. I've never really tried D2 in an E.D.C folding pocket knife. I've been carrying this thing for a little bit now. I don't just get a knife and unbox it and then give you a review. That's not how we roll here. This is the D2 model. It's got they probably call it a different color, but I'm going to call it like a flat dark earth-ish color and a blue handle. I like the blue handle because if I drop it outside, I like it to stand out a little bit, much like my Buck 110 Slim. I liked it in red. Same reason. I get busy, I'm doing something outside, I set it down, I want to be able to find it again. So I like this model that came with the brown blade and the blue handle. I also like that the clip is brown. And a lot of my pants are they're not like tactical pants, but they are kind of what you would think of as like canvas work pants. And they're generally either some kind of khaki earth color or they're olive drab, a greenish color or some version thereof. Maybe not exactly olive drab, but that color, flat dark earth, blends in pretty well with both. So that clip blends in pretty well. So I didn't have to paint the clip, which was a nice bonus. Now D2 is supposed to be a nice middle of the road, fairly corrosion resistant, not a stainless, somewhere in the middle, better than a lot of other steels. It's supposed to be middle of the road. And that coating is nice. One thing I will say, the fit and finish, if I'm comparing it to the Buck 110 Slim, similar price point, I don't like it as much. Also, I was hoping Ka-Bar. I was hoping it was made in America. It says made in Taiwan. Now, Taiwan is not China. I'd rather have a Taiwan knife than a China knife. Don't particularly like funding a country we may be going to war with. So, if I can, I would certainly take Taiwan over China. But that said, I was hoping it was American made. Buck knives are American. This one, the fit and finish is not as good. It's just, there's a few little things. The finish did not cover the blade completely. There's like a bald spot on the top of the blade. Also, not as ambidextrous. It has, instead of a simple hole cut in the blade, it has a stud and a pretty complicated like screw in Torx bit stud that you can change either side, but it's only one-sided. Whereas some of the other knives have a simple stud, however it's on both sides, like the Buck 110, like the next knife I'm going to talk about, and I like that design better. One of the first things I did, because if you don't know how I generally carry a full-size fighting handgun for EDC on my dominant side, my right side, and on the other side, I carry my EDC knife because I like a defensive option on both sides. If I'm carrying my gun on my right side, I like to have my go-to knife on my left side. So if I'm pinned down on one side or one arm is damaged, shot, being pinned behind my back while I'm getting beat into the pavement, whatever the situation is, I like to have a defensive option on the other side. So one of the first things I did with this knife was to flip the clip over and flip that stud over to the other side. So it's nice in that way. You can change the side of the clip, you can change the stud, but again, it's on one side. Something I really like about this knife, it is light. It is much lighter than any knife we've talked about except the Tough Light. It's a lightweight knife, and it's got, I think, a more usable blade. I talked about that Tough Light is a good utility, easy to sharpen blade. This is a very classic clip point, robust blade. Again, I would not feel bad carrying this as my go-to EDC. It's a good knife. It's a good utilitarian blade. If I was butchering an elk or a deer, I would rather have a buck 110, but this is not a bad choice. I wouldn't feel bad doing it with this knife. I've been cutting a few things. I do like the D2 steel. I think it's a good option where you're not going crazy. Is it S30V? No. Is it S35VN? No. But you're talking a $40 knife instead of several $100 maybe, or $150-ish for that powder metallurgy steel. For a good middle-of-the-road steel, it's a good steel, this D2. I'm pretty impressed with it so far. And the knife, it's pretty lightweight. I have a really lightweight, what I would call my go-to ultralight E.D.C. when I'm out running, and I got it for when I was running in a fairly large metropolitan area, and that is the Benchmade Bailout. And it's super, super light. Lighter than this knife, for sure. And similarly sized. But you're talking, that's, last time I saw one of those was like, I want to say $270. Now, I don't think I paid that for mine. We're talking inflation prices. But several times what this knife costs. This knife is light enough to run with in your shorts without having a belt or anything. It's a nice lightweight. So if you don't like having a bunch of bulky stuff in your pocket, it's a slim, easy to carry, lightweight knife. It's a good all-around blade, that classic clip point blade. When I looked it up, it said a 3-inch blade, which is a really good size. 3.5 I think I like better, but a 3-inch blade. A lot of places 3 inches is kind of your limit for a legal blade size. I know that knife laws can be finicky and fickle in different places, so this might be a good option for you if that is the case. But it's a good size knife. Things I don't like as much, again, fit and finish is not, comparable to the buck for a similar price. Also, it doesn't have much in the way of stopping your hand from slipping up on that blade if you had to shove it into something. It has a very slight taper to the handle. It doesn't have finger grooves, which I do not like finger grooves on guns, on knives. I just don't like them. This one has a very slight taper, which is very ergonomic in the hand, but if you had to stab with it, if you had to thrust it into something, puncture something for some kind of life-saving scenario, there's not much to stop your hand from slipping up on the blade there. So, it's a good utility knife. It's a good all-around utility knife. Would it work for defense? Yeah. I mean, my hands and feet work for defense. It's certainly a force multiplier. It wouldn't be on my top 3 list for a defensive E.D.C. knife. It certainly could be used for that, but that alone, paired with a smaller blade, I think there are better defensive E.D.C. knife options, but a good working utility blade and a good E.D.C. blade for mostly utility stuff, it's a good knife. And lightweight, so if lightweight and slim and 3 inches is kind of your criteria, that K-Bar Dozier is a good knife. And that D2, I like that steel. Now the next one, the only other one I got to kind of compete with the Buck 110 is one that I had heard good things about for a while, and that is the Ontario Rat knife. I got the Ontario Rat 1. I got it in OD green because that's one of my favorite colors, and I got it in AUS 8 steel. AUS 8 I'm familiar with. I have a fixed blade in AUS 8. It's a good, let's call it budget steel. It's not a gas station knife. It's not S30VN. It's not even D2. That said, they do make a D2 version, but since I got the Dozier in D2, I got this in AUS 8. That said, it's a good knife. It's a sharp knife. Here's the issue with the Ontario Rat 1 for me. It's kind of a pig as far as a folding E.D.C. knife. May not sound like a lot, but it weighed 4-point-something ounces. Now, I told you I carry a fixed blade day to day. One of the fixed blades that I carry is the Tops Mini Tracker, a fantastic EDC fixed blade. I weighed the knife alone, and it came in at 3-point-something ounces. You're talking about a fixed blade knife. Now, I weighed it with the sheath, and it weighed 5-point-something ounces, but that's not really fair because if you know how I EDC, I also have a metal ulti-clip on there. I have some extra cordage. I have fish hook, fish line, ranger band, water purification tablets, a metal container, and a ferro rod all on that knife, and it weighs 5-point-something ounces. This weighs 4-point-something, and that's just the knife. That's just the folding knife. It may seem like it's comparable to like the K-Bar Dozier or the Buck 110 Slim, but it is a pig. It is a big knife. That said, maybe you like a big knife. Maybe the knife is kind of what you build your EDC around. You have to carry a folding knife for legislation, or you just don't want to carry a fixed blade knife. And you want a good all-around folding knife where size and weight really is not a constraint for you. You're going to wear what do normal people wear, blue jeans. You're going to wear blue jeans. You're not in an environment where you care that somebody sees the clip or whatever. I will say one thing I like is the clip on this one came painted black. They probably do on most of them. I prefer black to silver, although to me, I don't wear black generally. I don't like black. It's one of the least blend-in colors in nature, I think. I prefer subdued colors, but the black clip I like better than silver. But at least it's not going to be flashy, giving your position away. So I like that about it, but it's a big knife. Here's the thing. I've been around enough knife and knife people to know that some people like fidgeting and playing with knives. If you like fidgeting and playing with knives, you probably heard that. This knife really has a thwack to it when you open it. Once you get it started, it's got that ambi thumb stud on there, a good design. It really thwacks open. So if you like that, if that's satisfying for you, maybe that puts it up there for you. I know that this knife is also popular, so they make several different models. Again, you can get it in D2. If this were going to be my EDC knife, I probably would get one in D2. Although the AUS 8 it's really held up. It's a good knife. If you kind of are not a knife guy, but you think you should be carrying, and size and weight is not a big thing, you don't do large distances on foot, you're not trying to carry it in basketball shorts or silkies like a stud, then you just want a good go-to, click it and forget it kind of EDC folding knife. It's a good all-around knife, although be it heavy. One of the things I really like about it is it's not only ambi on the clip, but it's ambi for position. So you can carry it blade up, blade down, right side, left side. So if you carry it on your left side, as I do, again, one of the first things I did when I got it was switch the clip over, and you like to orient it a certain way for training. I do try to train with the knife as a backup defensive tool. I would encourage you to, if you're carrying it for that reason. Then you can carry it in a lot of different orientations. If that's important to you, that's a big plus for this knife. Also, it's a good value. I think one of the reasons I got it was because for some reason I had an Amazon return gift card. I'm getting ready to be mobile again en route to Alaska to live there. I thought I probably should use that gift card, so I got this knife. Been messing with it for a while. Not that long, a short amount of time. I guess those terms are relative. However, it will be a good, if you weren't carrying a fixed blade, a good all-around knife. It certainly opens easier. The one thing I can say that makes it better than the Buck 110, if you like that opening, that fidgety, thwack sound of opening. If you like when you're bored to sit there and open and close your knife, maybe a satisfying knife for you. I think it certainly opens faster, even if it is louder, than the Buck 110 Slim. They make several different models. Again, the Rat 1 is the one that I'm talking about. It's a big knife, though, so just be aware of that. If you think it's comparable to the Buck 110 Slim or the K-Bar Dozier, it's not. It's a heavy knife. I think it would be a decent folding defensive knife option. It has a pretty substantial, beefy blade. It also has kind of a quasi finger groove, but not as obnoxious as a lot of them. So I'd call it a quasi 50% finger groove, but a far more substantial preventative measure from your hand slipping up on that blade if you're trying to shove it into something. For that reason alone, I think it's a better defensive knife, not to mention it has a bigger, beefier, more substantial blade than the Dozier. So I guess here's the rub. It's not the last knife I'm going to talk about, but do either one of those or any of the other ones I talked hitherto for, do they usurp the Buck 110 Slim as reigning supreme, as my number one recommendation for a folding EDC knife? No, they don't. The Buck 110 Slim to me is still the best all around. I didn't say for everybody, I didn't say in all situations. You may decide for reasons that I alluded to that one of the other options is better for you. You know, if one of your criteria is you have to get it at Walmart, you're probably getting something like a Gerber folder. But the Buck 110 Slim, it is just so good. It is a clip point blade, which is really good for puncturing and penetration. Perhaps not as strong if you were trying to pry something open with it, but it's a pretty robust knife. The Buck 110 Slim, the basic model, 440, is a decent steel, and it's 440 stainless, and Buck is known for having really, really good heat treat, so I think it punches above its weight class for the steel. Buck made in America, which both the Ontario and the K-Bar Dozier were made in Taiwan. Again, it's not China, but it's not where I would like to see it be made, in America. It's, as the name implies, slim. It is a really good knife. It's a really good butcher knife. Again, if that's what I had, and a lot of times that's what I carried in the field, I would use other butchering kits if I was butchering literally bison and elk and stuff when I got back to where I could do more thorough butchering, cutting into steaks and stuff, for sure. Maybe even, a power saw if I could get it. But that Buck 110 Slim is a great hunting knife. It is a great all-around EDC knife. It is a good defensive option knife. It's fairly ambidextrous. It carries really well. It has a very substantial blade. If you're talking about blade to weight ratio, unless you're talking about something like that's much more expensive, like a Benchmade bug out or bailout, I think power to blade ratio and quality ratio, money for what you get ratio, I think that Buck 110 has not been beat yet. So neither one of these knives, or any that I'm aware of in that same price point, have dethroned that Buck 110 Slim. The next one I'm going to talk about, I also use as a professional big game hunter and guide, and it looks like it. There's blood and fat in the crevices of this knife from who knows how many beasts. But it's an Outdoor Edge 3.0 Razor Light E.D.C. I assume they named it E.D.C. for everyday carry. That's why I'm going to talk about it. A lot of these knives, and I'll be honest, I prefer Havalon, but I don't think they'd make a good everyday carry. This one is named the everyday carry. It would be a decent everyday carry. What makes this one unique and why I saved it for the end, it's kind of in a category in and of itself. If you're just not going to sharpen a knife, you're just not going to do it. You want a good folding EDC knife, and you have no desire to learn how to sharpen a knife. You and you're just not going to do it. You're not willing to learn to do it, but you still want a good sharp knife. These are exchangeable blade knives. Kind of like the old school razor box cutter knives, but instead of that flat, very utilitarian, flat edge knife, this is like a pocket knife profile. Very classic 3-inch clip point. Not as substantial, not as beefy, obviously, because it's meant to be disposable, but very similar in size to that K-Bar Dozier. It's not as slim. It's fairly light. But again, it is exchangeable blade. So if you're going to have an EDC knife, and when it gets dull, you're just going to throw it in a drawer because you're not going to sharpen it, this might be the knife for you. The blades aren't that expensive. It comes with several blades. If you want a knife that you can be sure is going to be sharp when it gets dull, you just throw that blade away by putting it somewhere safe, like in an old Gatorade bottle or something, until it's full. The Outdoor Edge EDC knife. You might look at that. It's a cool little option if you want that exchangeable blade option. On that, rolling into the tactical tip of the day, on blades but not EDC knives, razors. Men, if you are still buying those super expensive 3, 4, 5, who knows how many blade, disposable, expensive razor blades, question why. There is something called a safety razor, which is a very simple mechanical device that screws down onto a razor blade. One blade. It's a sharpened piece of sheet metal that is very sharp, single-bladed. I shave with it, have for years. Gillette still makes, and these are from like turn of the century or even before, but they're still really good razors. And you just need the one little thin razor blade to replace it. Now again, I don't know what prices will be when you listen to this, but I literally just went to Amazon at the time of this recording and when I'm looking at my phone. Safety razor blades, Dorco, Platinum Extra, 100 razor blades for 550 pennies. That's $5.50. $5.50 for 100 razor blades. Here's the ones that I really like, splurge a little bit. The Gillettes. And I haven't used the Dorcos, to be fair, but I like the Gillettes of the ones, and I've been using different ones of these for years. But that's 100 count for 994 pennies, so $9.94 on Amazon. 100 blades. And they work really well. I don't think you're any worse off with that than like a Mach 3 or whatever they're up to now, Mach 10, I don't know. But they're a good razor blade. They're cheap, they're affordable. My wife also uses the same razor, we just change out the blade, but for shaving her, parts that ladies shave that I don't really care about shaving, like legs. She uses it too. She switched to it. If she's traveling or something, she might have one of the really cheap disposable ones in her, carry-on disposable toiletry kit. But for day to day, that's what we use. We have the one razor blade handle and we share it. We used to have like an old, vintage or antique, really small Gillette one. And we lost it somewhere or left it somewhere. Maybe it's floating around and we'll find it one day. Maybe like the Buck 110 Slim. But we pretty much share one razor. And it's, if you're looking for ways to, cut costs and still get a good quality shave, that's a pretty good one. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. This is something I've thought about combining both podcast Alpha Male and Gunfighter Life and naming it the Iron Sharpens Iron podcast. I often quote that verse, Proverbs 27. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Men, the point of being a good man and a good friend is not telling your friend what they want to hear all the time and supporting them no matter what. That's a garbage New Age philosophy crap. If your friend is doing something wrong, you need to correct them. You need to help them. And helping them doesn't mean just telling them what they want to hear. That's not a good friend. That's a wishy-washy, spineless, not friend. For instance, if my friend is working on some electrical work and he thinks he tripped the right breaker, but I'm pretty sure that there's still, a hot wire he's about to touch, I'm not just like, yeah, man, I support you, whatever you want to do. I'm like, no, hey, stop. I think what you're about to do is going to hurt. You could apply that to more important things, like if my buddy is talking about maybe cheating on his wife, committing adultery, like, no, that's not right. You shall not commit adultery. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you the truth. And that's cost me people in my life. That's cost me patrons. I'm not here to just tell you what you want to hear if I don't think that it's true. You're supposed to speak the truth in love, but you're supposed to speak the truth. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. I'd say a true friend is one who challenges you and hopes to encourage you to do the right thing, even when it's not what you want to hear, even when you don't think it's what you want to hear. He comes at you from the truth, and you may disagree from time to time, but as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. With that, men, hope you enjoyed this episode, and have a blessed day.